out. What's the bigger picture on the global economy? We had a chance to speak with Kaushik Basu, yes, former chief economic advisor in India, but now the chief economist in the World Bank. And the first thing I asked him is how he's viewing the global economy. Data has been steadily improving, but does he expect that improvement to sustain?
The global improvement actually since about roughly July is clear enough. Industrial production all over the world has picked up a little bit. Financial markets are doing a little bit better in Europe. I think the ECB's assurance that ECB will stand behind sovereigns has contributed to this. Also, we know that in the US, employment situation has improved slowly but clearly enough over the last couple of months. However, we are by no means, could we say that we are out of the woods? I feel that there is clearly another year or two, maybe two more realistically, of difficult times with Europe, because basically what is improving things in Europe is the injection of liquidity into the system. But injection of liquidity does not solve a problem. Injection of liquidity buys you time. In this case, there was no choice. I mean, the European Central Bank had to do it. The US Fed had to do it. Inject liquidity, buy yourself some time, and indeed time has been bought, and you can see that in some of the improving indicators. Nevertheless, there are important structural changes which will have to go in over the next year maybe. I mean, these things will take time in terms of banking regulation, in terms of fiscal policy, and we have to remember that at the end of 2014 and beginning of 2015, there is a European European debt cliff, which is going to come our way, because 3 years ago from those dates, money was injected into European banks, $1.3 trillion. That will be time for repayment. December 2014, February 2015, there will be this wall of repayment that will be looming up. And I feel up to that time, we will feel the very, very choppy waters of the European economy.
So then, Dr. Basu, the fiscal issues is what you're going to be focused in going into the end of the year, particularly the US fiscal cliff, and we were discussing that, of course, in the context of the Obama victory. Is that going to be the big overhang to deal with?
You know, fiscally, this is the big problem, and therefore it is a bit of an intellectual challenge, and you cannot easily point fingers at people deliberately doing something wrong, because you want fiscal tightening. At the same time, you don't want to put in austerity measures which will affect growth. Whether you're talking of US or Europe, the same actually is true, that the fiscal policy will have to be played out very, very carefully. For instance, the US fiscal cliff that we are talking about. At one level, you do want to make those corrections. You do want tax rates to go up. You want expenditure to be cut. But if you do this very sharp, the way the fiscal cliff would have us do it, the whole world will feel the tremors of the American economy facing the fiscal cliff. So these fiscal corrections will have to be done, but they will have to be done in a soft way so that growth does not get dampened. Likewise in Europe. You cannot put the weaker European economies, Greece, Portugal, etc., into an austerity program that is going to cause their growth to collapse, because if the growth collapses, the fiscal problem will get exacerbated. So it's a very thin line that has to be, that these countries will have to tread, and we will have to keep our fingers crossed, because the impact on emerging economies will be very big depending on what happens in Europe and in the US.
Dr. Basu, what is all of this going to mean for the emerging markets? I guess one way to look at it is that any potential upside coming in from the global economy will not materialize. And the other problem is that most emerging economies, the large ones, China and India to speak of, are fearing and facing their own domestic-driven slowdowns as well.
Yes, you know, I feel the sort of immediate prognosis for the Indian economy in particular, and actually very similar for China, is not good. So India will remain at this relatively lowered growth, which has been occurring between 5 and 6% is what you're getting. It was 6.4 last year, 6.5 roughly there. The quarterly has come down to 5.5. I feel it will remain this kind for a year or a year and a half. But let me tell you that about India, especially now that I sit in Washington and I look at the global landscape, I feel very, very positive about India in the medium term and in the long term. And you can see this from some of the behavior of the global financial markets. People are still putting in foreign direct investment into India. Last year was a record flow of FDI into India, which means that people are still betting on India in terms of the medium run and the long run. It's the short run which is difficult, and I think the worries are right. We have a year or a year and a half of difficult times in India because the global situation is so very terse and tense. But after that, given the fundamental strengths in India, to do with basically to do with India's investment and savings, but also foreign direct investment, I feel very, very confident that the kind of growth that we were talking about 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, growths of 8.5%, 9%, we must not give up on that because it is entirely possible for India to get back to that.
Theoretically, yes, Dr. Basu, but I don't need to tell you that back home, nobody is that optimistic. We're all talking about India as a mediocre growth, high inflation story rather than the reverse, which it should be a high growth, low inflation story. You don't think we've lost our way?
Yes. You know, I don't think on growth that has happened. Growth, yes, we have gone down. We will go back up again is what I feel. I feel, and actually I feel pretty confident that that will happen. Inflation is another story. Inflation has been relatively elevated right from the end of 2009 till now, roughly fluctuating between 8% per annum to 11% per annum. I like to believe it will go down. But when a country goes into this phase of very, very rapid growth, there is a bit of a tendency for inflation to also be at an elevated level. We have seen these from experiments like South Korea in the 1970s, growing at a breakneck speed, but also actually inflating much more than India is inflating now. So some of this inflation, I think we will have to live with. But if real growth is high, then there is more food, more clothing, more shelter. And yes, the higher inflation, even if it is, we are living at an inflation rate of say 6%, 7%, that is not good. But there is real growth which is making up for that.
That's one way of looking at it for sure. I'm not sure the central bank is looking at it like that. Last question, Dr. Basu, the fiscal end. Since you've left the finance ministry, we do have a fiscal roadmap, but we don't have details on how that roadmap would actually be achieved. Any thoughts?
You know, I was very closely associated with this till 3 months ago, but I have not followed the details over the last 3 months.
All right, Dr. Basu, I won't press you on that then. Thanks so much. Great to speak to you in your new avatar as well. Chief Economist at the World Bank now, Kaushik Basu there.
India's #1 news app. Just got even better. Download NDTV's new app. Fully optimized for retina display. Full screen view. Faster response time. And Sudoku. NDTV's new iPad app. Download now.